When I was in Seattle filming the scene I'd rewritten for Disclosure, you know, the one about modern day dating, Angelica, my new German friend, stayed in my apartment patiently waiting for Donald Sutherland to call her on my home phone. When he did call, she'd made the mistake of going shopping and missed him. He did, however, leave a number where she could reach him, and although she called him several times, always got an answering machine. Then he did finally return her call, and this time Angelica was home. Although I wasn't privy to their conversation, I would imagine Mr. Sutherland was either delighted or put off by Angelica's enthusiastic and somewhat manic response to his phone call. She wanted to meet him as soon as possible, but he told her he didn't have a lot of time and had to go to Canada, no doubt to visit his wife. He said he'd try and meet her for coffee the next week and would call her again. When he hadn't called within the week, she phoned him. He answered, but told her it wasn't convenient for him to speak with her at that time. She became incensed and accused him of playing games. I was horrified when she told me all of this. There was more, but I can't quite recall all the details of their exchange, or rather her passionate tirade. Needless to say, Donald never called her again, and all further irate calls from her were sent directly to voicemail. So she never did meet up with the actor, who she felt was destined to change her life, naturally for the better. Angelica was being totally unrealistic and living in her own dream world, where a successful, wealthy, and in this case famous, man rides along on his white horse to save her. The Cinderella complex comes to mind. Unfortunately, this has been a common story throughout history. But as much as women have advanced and attained success in so many areas of their lives, I do feel that total independence has often been the hardest to achieve because of a subconscious need to be taken care of, perhaps. Yeah, I know this is a much bigger and controversial subject, and I digress. So let's get back to Disclosure. A magnificent modern building of brick and glass had been assembled on a soundstage at the Warner Brothers studio, representing the Seattle Computer Company where most of the film took place. A closed set was called for on the first day of filming my scene with Michael and Demi, which meant that only essential cast and crew were allowed on the set. This was to create a more intimate and comfortable atmosphere for the actors when sex scenes were taking place. I won't go over the whole sequence of events in the scene, naturally, but basically, for me, I open the office door where Demi Moore's character Meredith is getting cozy with Michael Douglas's character Tom. The camera is focused on the lead actors, while my character, Mrs. Ross, says a few lines and Meredith responds. Then Meredith proceeds to force Tom into a sexual act, but then later accuses him of harassing her. I did this scene several times for Michael and Demi over the course of a few days, and for me it was just like being in a play, making my entrance, saying my lines, and then exiting. A week later, the filming of the reverse shot with the angle on me took place. I opened the door as I'd done many times for Michael and Demi, but this time the camera and crew were facing me. It was a bit of a shock seeing all those people and being the centre of attention. And the first words out of my mouth was, "Oh," which wasn't exactly the scripted line. My second take was perfect, though. And then Barry gave me a bit of business to do, which was new. Props gave me a key, and Barry instructed me to take the key out of my jacket pocket, lock the door behind me when I left the office, and place the key back in my pocket. Fortunately, it went smoothly. I did it on the first take, and I didn't drop the key. And that was it. On the day of my big scene, and despite it being a closed set, Warren Beatty came to meet Barry for lunch. He was very sweet and gave me a hug. Even though I've worked with a lot of big names, I never assume that they remember who I am. Donald Sutherland being a recent example of someone who had no idea who I was after we'd worked closely together in 1978. So when Warren approached me and gave me a hug, he even called me by name and commented on the fact that I was acting in Barry's latest film. It was a nice feeling. The main topic of conversation during this week of filming was O.J. Simpson's arrest for the murder of his ex-wife Nicole and a waiter at a local Brentwood restaurant, Ron Goldman. In particular, everyone was glued to televisions everywhere when O.J. went on the run in a white Ford Bronco driven by his best friend Al Cowlings. With dozens of police cars in pursuit, this slow-speed chase, I think it was 60 miles an hour, on the Southern California freeways was watched by millions of people who couldn't get enough of this real-life drama. I must admit it was compelling viewing. I'd never actually met O.J. Simpson, but we'd been on kind of nodding terms 10 years earlier when I'd worked on an HBO show called First and 10 about a woman who manages an American football team. The producer of that show, Peter Locke, was good friends with the Jews, and he and Nicole were at a New Year's Eve party at Peter's house, where I'd also been invited. However, Nicole and O.J. apparently had words and left the party before midnight. Karen, Peter's wife, and a friend of mine told me later that it was something to do with a bracelet that a woman at the party was wearing, and which was exactly the same as the bracelet O.J. had recently given to Nicole. I assumed, and I know one should never assume, that the woman was O.J.'s mistress, and I'm sure this is what Nicole assumed too. I'm sure if I spoke to Karen I'd get more details, but that's not the purpose of this episode. It was just something I recalled and thought I'd mention. We all know the tragic events that took place on Bundy Drive, not far from where I lived in Santa Monica. It was a shocking and senseless loss of two innocent people that caused a media circus for years to come. But back to disclosure. My next scene was to be filmed in Seattle, and it happened to be 3 weeks later from the previous scene. And it was in a bar where Mrs. Ross talks to one of the lawyers for Michael Douglas's character about dating in the 90s. The young lawyer was played by Donal Logue, a very talented actor, and so nice. We only did a couple of takes, and it went well. But unfortunately, it ended up on the cutting room floor. Apparently it was a last-minute cut because the film was running long, and since it was only a commentary about dating, it didn't really move the action forward and wasn't considered necessary. Oh well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. If my career had depended on having screen time, I would have been very disappointed. But I was quite satisfied making my film debut in a pivotal scene in Disclosure and having my character's name mentioned several times. By the end of the shoot in Seattle, a lot of the cast and crew had left and they were going to return to Los Angeles, including Barry Levinson and the producer, Peter Giuliano. And no thought had been given to the wrap party for the film. That's when Michael Douglas stepped in. He hired a large yacht which was moored on the Puget Sound, a stretch of water surrounding Seattle, and arranged food and drink for everyone. I don't know whether he was ever reimbursed by the producer, but the fact that he went to the trouble of organising the party was above and beyond what he needed to do. He checked in with me to make sure we had everything, and when I told him that we didn't have any decent music, he came back a short while later with his boombox and a pile of CDs. I'm happy to say that the speaker system on the boat was good enough to broadcast the dance music, and Michael's boombox wasn't needed. But it really saved the day in more ways than one. I'll always be grateful for his thoughtfulness and his kindness in making sure we had a decent wrap party. It's something I'll never forget about the lovely Michael Douglas. Next time, a trip to Germany in search of money and memories. If you're enjoying my episodes, my social media guru, Horatio, has asked that you please like the recordings, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when I post my next episode on Sunday. Many thanks, and your support is greatly appreciated.